We'll start off with some housekeeping. This is being recorded, so feel free to switch your cameras off. I always prefer to talk to people and see you, but I totally understand if you want to have your cameras off. The next question I'm normally asked is about slides, and all of these will be emailed along with the recording to everybody that registered. So well done being here, because I always think it's far better to watch these things live than watch the recording, although I do think the recording is super helpful. I would like you all to have your mobile phone to hand, because I do have a Mentimeter. So I don't have lots of questions to ask you, but if you do have your phone handy, you can answer some questions on Mentimeter, and we will definitely have time for questions at the end. You're welcome to put questions in the chat, but I'm not very good at watching the chat over there and presenting at the same time. So you might be better off just writing them down as you remember them and then asking at the end. If there is a burning question that has to be answered there and then, feel free to put it in the chat, and Daryl said she'll keep an eye on that for me, and she can interrupt me if there's something that's just not making sense. I'm sure Daryl will remind me that I've missed something vital out. So that's our housekeeping for this evening. And I just want to say that this is the first of 5 webinars, and the whole series is about stopping dyslexic learners underperforming at school. And I'm just going to give you a quick look at how they're organised. So if you think of the timeline that a child is at school from 4 to 18, where do these different webinars fit in? Well, the first one, why is learning hard for students that struggle with literacy, is applicable regardless of the age of the student. So it is for absolutely anybody. Next month, and we're always hoping to do these webinars on the first Tuesday of the month, just to make it easy to remember. Now, I know today isn't a Tuesday, but Tuesday is the 5th on this month, and we didn't want to clash with Guy Fawkes because we thought, parents and teachers might be very busy. So that's why we're Monday this month, but every other month we will be the first Tuesday of the month. And then next month, it's about stopping dyslexic learners underperforming in exams. Now, on the face of it, you would think, well, that's only for people with children about to do serious exams when they're doing GCSEs or A-levels. But in actual fact, we're going to talk about, in order to have the student ready at 16, what needs to be in place further down the school so they can have success when they're doing GCSEs and A-levels. So even though it looks like it's only here, I would recommend anybody come with any age, because I think it's really good to start with the end in mind and know what we're aiming for, and it helps us put all the pieces in place beforehand. So the third one we're going to look at is just really helping overcome problems with reading difficulties. And this is one area where technology is wonderful, and I'll be showing you an awful lot of technology. Then we'll be looking at writing difficulties and helping students overcome them. And then finally, we'll be looking at how to overcome memory difficulties, and that will be the first Tuesday in March. So that is what we have prepared for the next 5 months. But for tonight, we're just going to look at why learning is hard for students. And my objectives for this evening is I really want to raise your awareness of the barriers to learning, because I think the more we understand that, the more we can cater. It's all very well learning strategies and learning about technology, but every teacher needs to have this knowledge, because then they can react to the specific circumstances they're in, because every learner is different and they all have different weaknesses, and the subject you're teaching. So the more you understand, the easier it is for you to adapt. And I hope we're going to do a few simulations tonight, and I hope they increase empathy and understanding for what a lot of our students experience every day at school. And then I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about a collaboration called the KUDYT, and you'll know all about that later. So I always ask when people register, what's your role and what age of learners you support, and these are the people that registered, but you are the people that are here this evening. And so I'm really interested to find out about you guys, which is why I've got a Mentimeter. But before I go to do that, I want to explain why we invited both parents and educational professionals. And I believe that it's with partnership between school and home that we get the best results. I really do. And I see that schools are asked more and more to support wider and wider complex needs, and they just don't have the resources to do it a lot of the time. And yet often, and not in all circumstances, but often parents are an untapped resource. They can be highly motivated, but they just need to be trained. And I was that parent that was trained, and I know it made a huge difference to the success of my children. Even though they went to superbly dyslexia-friendly schools, they just couldn't supply all the extra support my children needed, and that's why it was important that I understood. So our heart in running this webinar and in the way we teach our trainee teachers is we want dyslexic children to have the best possible outcomes at school. And we know that it's not enough just to teach trainee teachers and the early career teachers. We need to help existing class teachers, teaching assistants, learning support, SENCOs, and parents and governors. Everybody that has an influence on the dyslexic child needs to understand dyslexia and the barriers, but also what's in place to help overcome the barriers. And the great news is there is so much that you can use, and most of it is free. So I really do recommend, getting more people involved. If you're in a school, maybe getting more teachers involved. If you're a parent, going to your school and saying, look, there's this free training for teachers, because we just want to help as many children as possible perform the best they can at school. So this is where I want you to use your phone. I'd like you to use the QR code if you could, and I would like to find out a little bit about you. Thanks for turning up this evening, but if I know about the people that are actually here, I can maybe tailor what I'm going to show to meet your specific needs. So I can see some of you have already gotten in there, and I will bring it over so you can see what people are saying. So let's see here. We have a whole, I love this colourful rainbow. We have parents, classroom teachers. Thank you so much for telling me this. I find it very helpful. It's often a combination of the above. I know that if I hadn't worked out that my children were very dyslexic, I would never have got involved in this. But parents are still winning at the moment, the highest category. Brilliant. Well, that's really helpful. You can carry on voting. I mean, if it's taken a while to get your phone out, if you can carry on voting, but I am going to move that away right now and stop sharing that. And then I'll just introduce myself a wee bit. I'm here representing Kingston University and the Driver Youth Trust. I'm employed by Kingston University, but I'm sponsored by the Driver Youth Trust, for whom I am very grateful. And my email address is there. So if having watched this, you have any questions that you don't manage to ask this evening, feel free to reach out to me on that email address, and hopefully we can start to connect. So I've talked about the Driver Youth Trust. I am part of a collaboration between Kingston University and the Driver Youth Trust, and we've come up with this really catchy name, which is KUDYT, or some of my colleagues say KUDYT, but I can't say that, maybe because I'm so dyslexic, I just can't read it, and KUDYT comes easier to me. But this is the collaboration that has sponsored this series of webinars. Now, Kingston University have strengths in this area. This has absolutely nothing to do with me. before I was involved with the university, they got an amazing Ofsted report that commented on how the training here is, well, one of the strengths was how inclusive it was. So Kingston University have a good track record in this area, but the Drive for Youth Trust, they particularly specialise in the drive for literacy, in helping students overcome problems with literacy in school, and they produce an awful lot of teaching resources to help teachers. And now my role is to incorporate them in initial teacher training practice. So that's something that I'm involved in. But it's not the only thing I'm involved in. So yes, I am equipping trainees to make lessons inclusive, but we as a university want to model best practice to all our students, so our staff are learning more about how to make their lessons accessible. And I'm also teaching dyslexic students to use lots of different strategies and technologies, so it just becomes common practice, and the non-dyslexic students are just used to seeing it, so when they go into schools it's their normal way of working, and that's what they'll expect when they start their careers. But also, as part of this webinar series, we want to deliver CPD for partner schools, and if you're creating it for partner schools, you can invite parents or anyone else who would benefit. And so we're really glad you're here. So this is our tagline: empowering educators, unlocking literacy, transforming lives. And we'll come back to this towards the end, and I hope it will make even more sense to you there. So we'll go back to the question that's on our lips this evening. Why is learning so hard for students that struggle with literacy? And how I would like to do this is I would just like to start off with a comic. And here we see that we've got I think this is just a fab comic. This is the School for or cartoon, I should say. It is a guy that can't get into his gifted school. And I often use this because I believe many of the students that we all work with who struggle with literacy are extremely bright, gifted and talented, but they struggle to meet the minimum entry requirements to get into the higher education institutes where their gifts and talents would really allow them to shine and to really make the most of their talents. But sometimes that, level 4 in GCSE English or the level 4 in GCSE Maths is really, really hard for some students. And I really work with students on making sure they can meet those minimum entry requirements so they can go into the higher education courses where they will shine. Now, everybody that's done any sort of research into dyslexia agrees that it has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. And what I've done in a lot of the slides is I've included research. So if you want to know anything that I've got in the slide, I've often backed it up with research. So if you see something at the bottom that has an underline, that will be a link that will enable you to find out more information. So anything to do with intelligence and dyslexia will be in that link. So what's the problem? If these students are intelligent, they do have gifts, they do have talents, why are they underperforming in school? Such that we put on a 5 webinar series to help overcome the difficulties. What is the problem? Why are they underperforming? Well, these are the typical dyslexic weaknesses, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's the common traits that we tend to see dyslexics struggling with at school. And again, more information underneath if you want to find out more. But whenever you show dyslexic weaknesses, I think it's very important to show dyslexic strengths, because there are many strengths that come with dyslexia. And I do think we, as teachers and as parents, we need to be aware of these strengths and play to these strengths. And this is what I'm showing the trainee teachers to do, how to use these skills in order to embed learning. And that's what we're going to be learning about over the next 5 webinars. So why are those difficulties a problem? Well, most schools expect students to read in order to learn, to take notes in class, which is a cognitively very complex thing to do because you're taking on new information at the same time as trying to write it down. And then they need to write to be assessed. So none of those tend to be dyslexic strengths. They tend to be dyslexic weaknesses. It's great for 80 to 90% of the class. That is the most effective way to learn. And I can totally understand why schools work that way. But for a minority of students, that is very difficult. And when it comes to exams, it's even harder because it's not just having to read in exams, it's speed reading. And instead of being able to look up information, we need to use our memory, which doesn't tend to be a dyslexic strength. And then there's speed writing. So a student could be very, very gifted in a subject, but if they can't read the exam question quickly, and if they can't write the answers down quickly, it's no good the information being in their head. Unless it gets on the exam paper, they can't get marks for it. And if you think about when it comes to revision, and revision's very, very important if you want to get good exam results, what are our students revising from? Well, they're reading textbooks, the internet, handouts, which is hard for dyslexic students. They're reading their own notes, and very often those notes are incorrect or incomplete because they struggle taking notes in class, or they're reading their own coursework or homework, which again might not be the best if they struggle to write and communicate what they've learned through writing. So none of this is really set up for dyslexic success. And here I just want to draw your attention to an article that was written by the BDA and published in The Independent. Now, it was published back in 2019, but I would guess things haven't changed that much since then. I know from anecdotal evidence, I don't think things have changed much at all. So that could be an interesting article for you to read. But it basically says the exam system as it is discriminates against dyslexic learners. And it shows it by showing how badly they perform in exams, when in actual fact we know that dyslexia isn't a measure of intelligence, so they should be able to perform on an equal footing. So it is worth having a look at that. But I just want to explain the attainment gap that I've witnessed over and over again to you briefly. So we're going back to the timeline of when a student is in school from 4 to 18 years. And at the beginning, there's a huge concentration on learning to read. And then once a student can read, there is an expectation that they will use that skill and read to learn. Then we're expected to write to be assessed. Certainly by the time students get into secondary school, they need to write to be assessed. Rarely does a teacher ask and give a mark for somebody verbally explaining what they understand. So because of that, this is what we tend to see. So if we have achievement on this axis and age down here, when students start school and there's messy play and there's, table talk, we find that the neurotypical and the neurodiverse or the neuroatypical students tend to be the same. But the more the emphasis comes on reading to learn and writing to be assessed, we see this attainment gap widening. And I've seen this a lot. I saw it in my own children, and it was this attainment gap that really motivated me to learn about the different technologies that could help reduce this attainment gap. So what I want to do now is to do a few simulations with you. I want to help you understand how it feels to be dyslexic in a school setting. So the first simulation is to do with reading. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share for a second. And a lot of problems, now if I stop my share, yes, a lot of problems that our students have is the dyslexic students, the wiring of their brain is such that automaticity doesn't really come with reading. And I know this from myself because I feel like, well, I'm very dyslexic, by the way, and I feel like I can read fine. Of course I can read. I'm an adult, I can read, I've got a degree. But what I've worked out is I spend so much time decoding that I don't necessarily understand or comprehend what I just read. And that means I often have to read it many times in order to get the meaning and to be able to answer questions. Now, I'm going to try and explain this automaticity to you from a child's perspective, and I'm going to do it in a bit of an odd way. So I'm going to ask you, and maybe you could switch off your microphones a second if you would. So I'll switch on your microphones a second if you would be so kind. And I'm going to ask you what this is. What is this?
Watch.
It's a watch. You're right.
A watch.
Thank you. What's this?
Battery.
It's a watch. It's the back of the watch.
Yeah.
And this?
Side of the watch.
Side of the watch.
And this?
The other side of the watch.
Yeah, and if I hold it upside down, still a watch.
Upside down watch.
Yeah. Now, until children go to school, they see an object is an object. It's got the same name, no matter which way you look at it. And it's a watch. It makes the same sound. I could say tick tock, except I don't think this one does. Same sound, same name, same purpose, regardless of which angle you look at it from. Now, feel free to switch your microphones off again. And oh no, I want them to stay on. I apologize. So in the same way, I'm going to ask you what this is. What is that?
Letter P.
Yes.
Letter P.
A P. Brilliant. What's that?
Oh, it's just gone.
You can't see it into your background.
Oh, I've got to have it right near my head. Thank you. What's that?
P.
A P.
Letter P.
P.
What's that?
Backwards P.
Bit of a Q.
It's a Q or a 9. Okay. What's that?
D.
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 What's that?
B.
B.
So dependent on the angle we look at this on, it has a different name and a different sound. Same here. What's this?
N.
N.
An N. What's that?
U.
A U. So now that I've explained that to you, now you can switch off your microphones, and we're going to do a reading comprehension exercise together. Now, I have my timer here. I'm not just going off to ring somebody up. I'm going in and I'm going to set a timer for a very specific time. So it's something that should only take you a minute to do. It's a very, very simple, typical exercise that a child would have to do at school. But what we're going to do is we're going to have an extra 25% of the time, so that's an extra 15 seconds, to show you what extra time is like. So you should be able to do it in 1 minute, but because I am being kind, I'm going to give you 25% extra time, so I'm going to give you 1 minute and 15 seconds. So if you have, I should have asked you earlier to get a pen and paper ready. If you could get a pen and paper ready, we're going to do a comprehension exercise together. I'm hoping you are ready, so I'm going to start show you the slide with the comprehension exercise on it, and I'm going to start the timer. So please do this comprehension exercise.
Sorry, it's not shared on the screen.
It's not showing.
Oh.
You haven't shared your screen.
Oh, do you know what? I apologise. That is very silly of me. I will start that again. So you've got plenty of time to let me do a new one. 1 minute, 15 seconds. Thank you for letting me know. I will start that up. Up. Stop. There we go. Sorry, start. You've got a little bit of help there. 50 seconds left. Thirty seconds left. Ten seconds. Please put your pens down. So, how easy did you find it to answer those questions? Has anybody got all three questions answered? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how simple it is when the letters aren't mixed up. So it was actually a very simple comprehension exercise. It's probably something you would do at the top of primary school, and yet we really struggle to do it. Now, I know that I have a Mentimeter question, but I actually have one that I should have asked you about the age of your children that you support, but we're going to jump ahead of that, and we're going to learn. I'm going to ask you to share, how did that reading comprehension make you feel? I've got the QR code there again in case you came out of Mentimeter, but I think it's really worth reflecting how that made you feel.
For me, it's not coming through. It's
Oh, is
saying
it not?
I haven't changed the slides.
Okay, I've let me try it again. Thank you for letting me know that. Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah, that seems to work.
Okay, thank you very much. Ah, great. Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, well, someone said rushed and tightly confused. I was trying to give you like an exam. The pencils down, you've got so many minutes. I was particularly nasty, but I'm trying to help us see how it feels for a child when they have to do a reading exercise, because I know I sat in on somebody else teaching and they did something like this, and I was determined to do it, and then I had a terrible headache afterward, and we just did that for 1 minute and 15 seconds. But if you're doing that for 4 hours a day, it's really, really hard. And I think we've really got to think, when we're planning lessons, when we're planning classes, how much reading are we expecting our students to do? Because there are so many other ways of helping them understand information. So I will leave that Mentimeter now, and we will go on to the next simulation. Oh, we've done that. So we're going to do a writing simulation now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to write "the cat sat on the mat." Shouldn't take very long. And then once you've written that, I could ask you to close your eyes and write "the cat sat on the mat." And it might be worth now I'd like you to use your left hand and do exactly the same. Right? "The cat sat on the mat." And what I will hope will have happened is, when you closed your eyes, it's normally very simple to write. Now, it's not easy to stay on the lines, but it's very simple to write because you have automaticity when it comes to handwriting. But when it comes to using your left hand, you don't have the automaticity. So it's much, much harder. Now, it's not a perfect simulation, but it gives you an idea of how hard handwriting is for some of our students. And I know I've seen students hand in work that looks like it's just been flung together last minute, but in actual fact, they've spent a long time trying to make it look good, but they just don't have the automaticity when it comes to handwriting. So that was a second simulation. Now I want to ask you, and again, feel free to turn your microphones off or tell me in the chat, do you know what this sign is? Are you familiar with this sign? If anyone wants to shout out or say in the chat what it is.
British Rail.
British Rail, yes. It's funny, when I teach adults, they say British Rail the way I would. Most young people say the train station, which is also true. But we're all very familiar with this. We see it every day. But as part of a visual memory simulation, I'm going to ask you to draw that British Rail sign from memory as best you can. And then I'm going to ask you, have you finished writing? Can I move on? Oh, drawing, I should say. I'm going to move on and hopefully you will see. Correct your own work. Did anyone get it 100% correct? And this is something that we are very familiar with. And the reason I show this is you're familiar with this, and chances are you probably don't struggle with visual memory. But our students, when we put stuff up on the board and then we take it away, once it's taken away, they can think that they're writing down something correct, when in actual fact, they're not. They're really, really not. So that is our visual memory. And I think having seen how hard it can be to write, and writing notes in class is cognitively difficult because you're taking on new information at the same time as writing. And if you also have visual memory difficulties, I think we should ask ourselves how confident we can be in the accuracy of class notes. And I know I've seen many students' class notes that were just a mess. They were incorrect, incomplete, because the student just wasn't capable of taking notes. And there's one more memory simulation I want to do, is I want us first of all just to use our working memory. So I'd like you to think of a very secure password that you have, maybe for a banking app, and something that you keep very safe and you don't want that. I'm going to ask you not to write it down, even though you're in the safety of your home. Please don't write it down. And tell me that, well, don't tell me. Think through the 3rd, the 6th, and the 7th digit. And you're probably using strategies. If you're not writing it down, you might be, I know I need to count them out on my fingers. And I find it much easier to write it down because I do have a weak working memory. And so I'm just showing you what it feels like to use your working memory. And now I have a second simulation, which simulates using your working memory if you have problems with concentration and attention. So I've recorded the next exercise.
We're going to do the working memory exercise, and I'd like you to use the same very secure password, but this time I would like you to give me the 2nd, the 5th and the 8th digits. I'll just repeat that. I'd like the 2nd, the 5th and the 8th digits. If you're anything like me, you found that second exercise a lot more difficult because of the distractions. And we have children in our classes that find it very hard to not be distracted, that everything gets their attention, not just what the teacher says. And in those instances, I'm sure it would have really helped you to have also had some written instructions as well as verbal instructions. So making the instructions as clear as possible for students that are easily distracted is advisable. It's also advisable to reduce the cognitive load for students that struggle with working memory. And we're going to talk about how we can use teaching methods that reduce cognitive load in this webinar series.
If we ask the question, why is learning hard for students? If we think about their weaknesses, and then we think about how school is organised to be really effective for the majority who do find reading and writing easy, you see why students who can be very gifted, very talented, don't tend to do very well in school. And one of the main reasons for this isn't necessarily these commonly known weaknesses. I think self-esteem has a huge part to play in it. And I'm just going to try and explain that a little bit more. But before I do, for the educators amongst us, if we think of Bloom's taxonomy and we think of the lower order thinking and the higher order thinking, we see that things like remembering, memory, are the typical dyslexic weaknesses. But when it comes to creating, evaluating, analysing and applying, these tend to be the typical dyslexic strengths. So there's an awful lot of overlap between dyslexic strengths and higher order thinking. So if we can modify how we transfer knowledge, we can help these students to show their talent and their gift and their intelligence in school. But this is what I see too often. So here we see a student struggles in class, and our children aren't stupid. They compare themselves to their peers and they see themselves struggling with something that their peers find really easy, and that makes them anxious. And anxiety impedes performance regardless of what you're doing, whether you have a learning difference or not. And anxiety results in the quality of work decreasing, and then they're struggling and they compare, and we see this vicious cycle. So that leads to a lack of self-esteem. Now, the difficulties with reading and writing and spelling are part of the neurological difference of dyslexia, but self-esteem isn't. Self-esteem is a result of how our teaching practices that rely on reading and writing. And so students very often think by the time they've got to secondary school, I'm not very bright, I'm never going to do particularly well at school. And so even though the strategies and technologies exist that will help them overcome, they won't use them because they've already given up on achieving. So if we think of the achievement gap we looked at earlier, if teaching methods cause anxiety, anxiety impedes learning, and once self-esteem is hurt, it's very hard to rebuild it. And if we think of a real world situation, in every last single class, we're going to have 3, 4, 5 children that struggle with literacy. Now, in actual fact, the stats are 1 in 5 students struggle with literacy. That might not be because of dyslexia, but there are many reasons why students struggle. And I've made the teacher here blue because most teachers are not dyslexic. Some are. Now, some teachers have learned a lot about how to make lessons inclusive, but there's no mandatory need. And so it depends on the training that schools have provided. There's no guarantee that a teacher knows how to make lessons inclusive. And one of the dangers is dyslexia shows itself in so many different ways. No two dyslexics are the same. But sometimes if you've seen one dyslexic child that comes in a particular way with particular strengths and weaknesses, it's easy to think, well, if that helped them, this will help all dyslexics. And unfortunately, it's not that simple. So we've already talked about the tension between literacy and intelligence, but that results in chronic underachievement. So if we can be inclusive in the way we transfer knowledge, it really does transform learning for not just the dyslexics, but for all children. And I equate it to having a paediatrician who's not trained to spot common childhood illnesses like asthma or diabetes. It's just unheard of, and I think it's very, very important that we do train our teachers to be able to identify dyslexia, even though it doesn't present in the same way, and also how to support it. So what I would say, if teaching is ineffective for a minority of the classroom, we've got to ask ourselves, where is the problem? And it's very, very easy to think, well, the majority of the children get it, therefore the problem is the children that don't get it, when in actual fact the problem is we're not training teachers to be inclusive. Although many teachers are inclusive, and I learn a lot from inclusive teachers, it's not mandatory, and we want to make sure that all the students that graduate from Kingston know how to make their lessons inclusive. So if that's what one classroom looks like, this is how a whole school situation looks. And, you know, the teachers aren't necessarily trained, some will be, and they need to supervise any learning support that happens within their classroom. And so what tends to happen is they outsource to people like me, and we tend to be expensive because we do one-to-one support. And also there is a hideous short supply, particularly in secondary school, of trained people to help make learning inclusive. And I, as a dyslexia tutor, had no direct communication with class teachers, so it was a hideously inefficient way of working. And even more difficult is so many students are unidentified that parents don't even know that they need to employ a dyslexia tutor. And that's when people end up coming to university, and we only find out when they're here that they are dyslexic. So an uninformed teacher leads to children not being identified, supported, and as a result they underperform and talent is lost. But if we have informed teachers, they can make their teaching inclusive. They can teach their students how to use assistive technology, and that's what we're going to be talking about a lot in our next webinar. They will have the confidence to partner with parents and teach parents how to support learning at home, and we get the right access arrangements in place so exams are no longer the huge obstacle that they are without exact access arrangements. So the benefits of our KUDYT project are more children will achieve their potential, but more importantly, inclusive teaching benefits all students. It really does help all of them. So inclusive practice is about transferring knowledge without using teaching methods that rely on dyslexic weaknesses. And that's what we're going to be doing over the next 4 months. The first Tuesday of the month, we're going to talk about exams and how to use technology, and then how to overcome other difficulties. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building on the knowledge that we've learned today. We're going to be thinking, how can we transfer knowledge without using these weaknesses, and how can we use the strengths that these learners do have. So now I hope our tagline of empowering educators, unlocking literacy and transforming lives makes even more sense to you. And this is the collaboration as it stands, but it isn't enough to make a difference. And what I'm going to ask you is to join this collaboration. You're here at the first webinar. We're very grateful you're here, but we could really do with your help just to get other people involved. We will be recording this, so if somebody's missed it and they need to watch it, they can do so. But maybe there are teachers within your school who already know about dyslexia, but maybe they could come along to the rest of the webinars and learn about the technology. And I think post-COVID, there are so many schools that have lots and lots of great devices, and yet they don't know how to use them to their best advantage. And I see students carrying these fantastic devices that could transform their learning around in their backpacks and not getting them out and using them in lessons. So I really would ask you, if you're part, can I ask you to mute if you would? If you're part of a Senko network, if you're part of a Senko network or a head teachers network,
I can put lights on.
could I ask somebody to mute for me? If you are part of any sort of network, if you could share the information from this and future webinars, we would be so grateful, because we do want to spread the word and help as many children achieve as possible. So that's everything that I'm going to cover this evening. I hope you know how the future webinars will be. If you want to book on the next webinar, Natalie kindly provided this QR code, which you can get straight on and book your place at the next webinar, which is Stop Dyslexic Learners Underperforming in Exams. And I'm free to answer any questions you might have now. I'll leave that on a little bit longer in case you want the QR code.
Caroline,
Yep.
Anita had a question earlier on in the chat. Anita, are you still there? Do you want to ask the question?
Thanks, Daryl.
Yeah, I suppose I just wanted to highlight the fact that actually it can be incredibly difficult to get a diagnosis of dyslexia. I've got personal experience of this. I know we're talking generally here, but from my own experience, I'm part of a parent carer forum, and I know a lot of other parents would agree with me that in order to get the diagnosis for dyslexia, you have to go for a private assessment, and that's £750 upwards. And unfortunately, without that diagnosis and without something in writing within an EHCP, the situation is that, even within a school that is really trying their best to help, they are under-resourced. Programs like this are amazing, but as you've already said, children have their own specific needs around literacy and dyslexia as well. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on how best to meet needs when there's going to be a large number of children that are actually undiagnosed and the literacy difficulties aren't even recognised.
I will try to answer in brief. I totally agree with what you're saying. I had private assessments for all my children, and not only is it expensive, I had to wait a long time for them. I was like really shocked at how hard it was to get. So I totally know where you're coming from. But what we are doing as a university is we want to make it so whether a child has a diagnosis or not, teaching is inclusive. We are not relying on children having to read in order to understand and be assessed. So from that point of view, if we had more teachers doing that, it makes the diagnosis less important as a teacher. As a parent, I want my child to understand that, look, yes, I do find this difficult. And when I compare myself to my friends, I feel stupid. I want them to have a diagnosis for that reason. And what I often use is I use online screeners, and they cost £15 and they're automatic. And there are lots of different ones. That Dyslexia Gold does one, Nessie does one, IDL do one. I have a Nessie account, so I tend to use that. And it takes about 15 minutes. It costs about £15. And you get a little report that's much easier to understand than an EdSite report. And from the child's perspective, we can learn, oh yes, your working memory's poor, and it tells you your strengths as well. And I think if you can't get a formal diagnosis, that's the way to go. So yes, that's what I would do. But I do think I've often gone back to schools when they've said, you need a formal diagnosis in order for us to do anything. I said, okay, what will you do differently if I get a formal diagnosis? Because one of the most difficult things is you get that formal diagnosis and you've spent all that money, you've taken your child out of school, and then the school does nothing differently because they don't get any more funding because they have a dyslexic child. There's not a lot they can do. And then I say, well, if I bring a dyslexic screen in, will that work? And they normally say yes.
I suppose it's about identifying those specific areas of need so that specific strategies can be put in place that are relevant. How do you spell Nessie?
Nessy. You're asking a dyslexic to spell something. Let me just go. Oh, I'm so rubbish. Let's have a look. I'm sure that's Ness. Yeah, Y and dyslexia quest. But don't worry, I am so comfortable with my inability. Is fine. Dyslexia quest. But as I say, IDL does one, and it used to be called Dyslexia Gold, and they do an eye tracking. So Dyslexia Gold probably gives you a little bit more, although I do think it's changed its name. I'm just checking what it's called now. But they all price them very similar.
Okay, that's really useful to know. Thank you.
Let me just check what it's called. Dyslexia Gold. It's called Dyslexia Screener Beyond Phonics.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other questions? Giving me a very easy time. Oh, feel free to switch on your switch on your microphone and just ask.
Can I ask you something? Oh,
okay.
You go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I work at a special needs school. Some of the students struggle to take down notes. Sometimes I think it's better if they don't take notes down, because it kind of slows the classroom pace, and then after that they don't do work. I don't know what to do. Well,
I totally understand that. I agree. Some students are just not capable of taking notes. I personally, even though I'm very dyslexic, I learn as I write. It forces me to listen and summarize and then do something with that. So it helps me remember more of what was taught. But I would say to every teacher, if you provide bullet point notes instead of expecting the children to take copious notes in class, and then the children can, if they want, annotate them with additional information, I think that is the best way forward. And I think that it's just such a simple, easy way of making the child less anxious in class, more present with the teaching and involved in teaching. And if you're in a school where you have limited budget and you can't print out, and you don't want to just single out the dyslexic children by giving them notes and not the others, for secondary schools, you could make it available on devices, so just a soft copy. But I definitely think to supply, I always supply my students with PowerPoints, and every so often on the PowerPoint, there will be a PowerPoint that I am not showing. It's a hidden PowerPoint, but it has all the details of everything that I've just said to save them having to take notes. And therefore they can be present with me and they can be actively learning, asking questions and answering questions, rather than thinking, what did she say? How do you spell that? I can't read what I've written. And then just being anxious and always being a minute or two behind, rather than in the moment with the lesson. So I would agree with you.
Okay.
Sorry, there was what was it, Gilla?
Judy. Yeah.
Judy, yeah. Hi. My question is on the back of that, actually, because I saw some TikTok videos about the use of AI in classrooms, and I'm just wondering whether that's going to be something that you are going to cover in your subsequent webinars. So the use of AI and assistive technology together.
Yeah, funnily enough, no, but that doesn't mean I won't. Now you've said that, because I definitely include AI when I'm teaching the students, but with the students I have like 26 hours and with this I have 5 hours. So at the moment I wasn't thinking of using AI, but I was going to use technology. But now you've said that, I will reconsider if there's a place where I can use AI. Judy, is there anything particular that you want to use AI for?
Well, it was just a video that I happened to see, and it was a lady suggesting that you have your microphone on during lessons. So, for example, a student has their laptop in the classroom with the microphone switched on so that it listens to the teacher, and then it would put it into a Word document, and then you then somehow use AI to summarize
absolutely
what you've heard.
Well, the dictation, I am not convinced that's the best way of doing it, but I would be very grateful if you would forward that to me, either put it in the chat now or maybe send me an email, because I'd love to see that. But yes, getting AI to summarize things is fabulous. It really is. But I would also say that depends on the age of the child, because for younger children, one of the common weaknesses I see with dyslexic children is they don't know how to summarize, and anything we can do to help them summarize it is really good. So I wouldn't want to outsource that to AI straight away, but I would definitely do it for older children who need to summarize a lot, you know. So yes, I would definitely do that, but I would, yes, we can talk about that when we talk about technology. Now, I've noticed it is now 7 o'clock and they lock the university up pretty soon. And so those of us who are in the university at the moment, I was locked in quite recently. So I don't really want to be locked in. Daryl, has anyone been past you? Are they, do we need to finish
around the door, but we will need to finish.
Yeah. So I'm really sorry that that's all we have time for, but if you want to drop me a question via email, you're very, very welcome to. My email will be on the slides that you get, or if you want to put one quickly in the chat now, I will look at the chat when I get home. So I hope you found that useful. I hope that you will be along to future webinars, and please do spread the word, because the more people learn this, the better. We want to give as many children as we can the opportunity to achieve their full potential. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you at the beginning of December. See you. Bye bye.